On this build, I took my fiber optics to the next level, tried a new panel shading method, and threw part of the kit in the trash. This is what could go wrong, models. Hey there and welcome to the channel. This isn't everyone's favorite X-Wing, but I'm still experimenting and terrified to screw up one of my nice models in the stash. Turns out, this was a great decision. This kit comes with two sets of parts, the orange X-Wing color scheme and the blue resistance fighter scheme. Seems Bandai was trying to save some money. Now I failed miserably with the orange set and ended up using the white set in the end. I started snipping parts out of their sprues and dry fitting the body to assess how I can run the wires and fiber optics for how I'm going to light this. My plan was to add some instrument panel illumination as well as engine lighting. There was very little space to do this though. Because the wings can actuate, the mechanics for this took up almost all the space in the body. I decided I can make it work as long as the wings are locked in attack position. The wings themselves were so thin, I had to get enamel coated wires that were small enough to fit into the trench I dug out. As I said before, this did not work out. I realized the engine LEDs were too far inside and my trench putty was falling out. So let's skip all that and try again. For this attempt, I drilled holes in the wing and rotation barrel so the wires can run from the exhaust port all the way back to the base of the body. I ground down the nubs to make space for the 3mm LED and painted the inside black to block the light. I pulled the wires through, closed up the wing, and repeated this 3 more times. Perfect. Now these wires can get in my way for the rest of the build. Now, the stock thrust nozzles aren't built for lighting, at all. So I jumped into Blender and modeled custom replacements that would let light through the fan blades. I printed a set of 4 using my resin printer, and they turned out pretty well. Eventually. I couldn't get all the details I wanted, but they are a massive improvement from the originals. I superglued them into place, and then realized I had a sizable gap. I took some Tamiya 2-part putty and filled it in as best as I could. A quick test, and oh yeah, that'll do. I moved on to light the cockpit. I knew I wanted to illuminate the main flight instrument screen, so I decided I could do this by carving out the plastic behind it so that the screen was thin enough to let some light through. I'll then mount an LED to backlight it. I took a rotary carving Dremel bit to it and then light blocked the area except for where I wanted the light to come through the screen. So far, so good. I also wanted to add some light up buttons using 0.25mm fiber optics, but had to purchase drill bits small enough for the task. I looked at it the wrong way and it broke immediately. I tried the next size up in the pack and then sneezed on it. Finally, the next size up managed to stay intact as I carefully drilled out the holes. This bit was slightly larger than the width of the fiber, but I had a plan for that, and I'll come back to it in a little bit. There was one more part that I wanted to light on this model. It wouldn't be complete without R2's signature red light. So I started snipping him out of the sprue and spent the next 30 minutes looking for him. I drilled a 0.5mm hole in R2's dome, being careful not to drill too close to the edge, and then test fit a fiber strand. I carved out a hole in the neck plug and sliced a notch for the fiber to bend through. I then pulled the fiber and made sure the pieces fit together snug. Next, I test fitted an 0402 SMD LED to check for light leaks in the cockpit. There was quite a bit of light coming into the footwell, so I measured out the area and cut a piece of styrene sheet to box out the LED. I sealed the seams with some Tamiya liquid putty and went on to secure the LED to the screen using some UV resin. I then masked off the screen before giving all of the cockpit components a coat of Tamiya Fine Surface Primer. All the pieces were then given a base coat of Tamiya Dark Gray, and it was finally time to get some painting done. Using a brush, I started detailing the panels and buttons. I used Tamiya titanium silver and copper colors to give the pipe some extra dimension and then dry brushed with a light gray to bring out some of the raised details. The control stick and seat got a flat black, and then I just added some detail colors for hoses and other lights in the cockpit. Now I forgot to hit record a bunch of times, so here's how the instrument panel turned out. I painted the display screen with Tamiya clear green using a brush. In hindsight, I should have airbrushed it for a cleaner look, but I mean, it turned out. Moving on to painting Poe Dameron, we've got the classic orange flight suit with black gloves and boots. His flight vest, life jacket thing got a buff tan treatment, and the little chest box device in a light gray. I'm sure someone's gonna come along in the comments and tell me what its canonical name is. I really wanted to see if I could paint his helmet with the design that it has in the movies. I couldn't get some of the finer details done under the camera, but I was really happy with how it turned out, given how small it was. The whole figure got a dark brown wash, and then I turned my attention over to R2. I used Tamiya titanium silver for his dome, and then went in with a flat blue for the colored panels. I'm not ashamed to admit that I needed some help to see what I was doing here. I finished up with some blue accents on his body, but didn't go any further since his lower half is going to be obscured by the X-Wing. Happy with that, it was time to get back to the ship and install the fiber optics. I cut 4 strands of 0.25mm fiber for the cockpit lights and 1 strand of 0.5mm for R2. I bundled all the strands together at one end, taped them together, and affixed them to an 0402 LED with some UV resin. I wrapped it with some heat shrink and used my soldering iron to seal it all up. I then pulled all the strands through the previously drilled out holes and dry fitted all the components to make sure it fit. Satisfied with the placement, I secured the LED to the base of the body interior with some more UV resin. Next, I trimmed off the excess length of fiber and then ever so cautiously used the tip of my soldering iron to slightly melt the end of the fiber and cause it to bloom. This will help the fiber fit snug in the hole and smooth out imperfections from being clipped. In hindsight though, I need to find a less risky way of doing this. I pulled the fiber into place to check the fit and may have had to redo some a few times. Once happy with it, I painted the ends with some Tamiya clear red, orange, yellow, and blue. Not bad at all, but I think next time I'll scuff the end a bit to diffuse the light more. Oh well, on to paint. I started off by giving everything a coat of white Tamiya fine surface primer and then pre-shading panels using Tamiya Sky Gray. I was worried that a darker color would contrast too much with the white and orange top coats, and the gray worked out well, for now. There are a lot of small panels and I didn't think I could airbrush fine enough lines to keep the panels distinct. So I masked off one panel at a time and painted 1 or 2 edges only. I alternated between shaded and unshaded panel sides to give them a more distinct edge line, and the idea is that the broken up shading pattern would help make the panels more visible. This, however, was a lot of work. I mean, a lot. Was it worth it? For the model, I'd say no. The weathering effects tended to hide a lot of the shading in the end, but for me personally, absolutely worth it. I learned a ton and got a lot of practice doing it. I'll definitely do it again and won't be too afraid to go with a darker shade next time. I moved on to pre-shading the lines and contours of the wings and engines. Here I went with the simpler approach of just painting lines over the geometry of the model. No stop and go masking, just serene airbrushing. Seriously, if anyone needs a peaceful dopamine inducing activity, this is it. Finally, it was time to do some real painting. I mixed some sky gray into white and loaded it into my airbrush. I started off with very light mist coats, being cautious of covering up the shading. It really didn't take much to lighten the shaded areas, so I had to know when to call it quits. Alright, that looks good about there. Here's how the shading looks with a side-by-side comparison. I think the effect works well and just needs to be a little darker. Next up was the orange. I started with Tamiya flat orange and added a few drops of flat yellow and sky gray. I reversed the masking on the kit and went to town. I wasn't sure how the gray shading would look with the orange on top, but there's only one way to find out. I again forgot to hit record when painting the wings, which is truly a shame because I thought I did a banging job of masking for this paint. I'll have to settle for some peel porn instead. There's a different kind of music that should be used for this. Base coats are complete. Time for painstaking accent details. The paint scheme calls for silver wing panels with these blue hash marks. I'll also need to apply the same colors to the engine nacelles. These came as decals, but come on, I'm not going to use them. I started by masking off the panels on the wings and laying down a flat blue. I did use the decals, however, to trace the pattern of the hash marks and cut masks of tape. I then went over the panels again with a flat black. I had decided to try some Vallejo metallic paints for this kit, and I understand a black undercoat is necessary, but I didn't want the metal to be too shiny, so I went with a matte black instead of a gloss. While I had the black paint in my airbrush, I primed all the other parts that were going to get a metallic finish. For the canopy, wing panels, and engine intakes, I'm using the Duraluminum color from Vallejo. I've never used their metallics before, but call me a fan now. The metal flakes are much finer than in Tamiya's metallic lineup, and really fits the scale properly. Tamiya's metals kind of sparkle a bit too much for a 1/72nd scale, and this paint sprayed smoothly right out of the bottle. I had an absolute blast using it. It's a beautiful finish that really sells as metal and knocks the mask peeling satisfaction level up a notch. This is peaceful dopamine release activity number 2. Hands down, favorite part of the build. I mean, look at that. Alright, that's enough. I finished things off by applying this gunmetal gray to the exhaust nozzles. After that, I called this metallic experiment a success. Oh, wait, I forgot about these gun barrel ends. And the barrels themselves. Okay, now I'm done with metals. The last pieces to spray were the mechanical greeblies. I first sprayed them with a couple coats of Tamiya German gray, then dry brushed with light gray so that all that fine detail is visible. To cap off the base painting, I hand painted these areas flat blue. Originally I had such high confidence I could mask and spray them, but I chickened out at the last minute. I was so close to the end I didn't want to risk a paint leak and have to fix it. And now, it's done. Next it was time to put together the sub-assemblies and complete the internal wiring. I'm gonna be completely honest with you though here, I nearly gave up on the project at this point. Here's what happened. Solder just wouldn't stick to these wires and frustrated the hell out of me. I melted a mark in the body from a resistor being heated by the soldering iron. One of the engine LEDs all of a sudden died, and I had to cut off an engine nozzle that was already superglued. I then had to redo all of the wiring and soldering to replace the LED. But, as 3-time Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter Kelly Clarkson once said, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Stand a little taller." So I pulled myself together and wired in the resistor for the cockpit lights. The last step was to solder the 2 circuits together and complete the positive and negative runs through the base. The last physical piece to install was R2. Simply a matter of running fiber strand through him and clipping off the excess. I hit the entire model with a gloss clear coat and started applying the decals. Easy work, and it felt great to just sail through steps right now. Because I've got the gloss coat on, I went with the panel lining and pin washing next. For the white body section, I took this color for white and winter camo from AK Interactive. I lightened it so it doesn't contrast too much, but for the orange body section, I used the color as is. Light dabs in the panel lines and recessed areas, letting the fluid flow naturally. Then wipe away the excess using a cotton bud and brush. I'm always impressed at the difference this step makes. Moving on to weathering and chipping was on deck. I started with the sponge in sky gray and took my time to dab the color along the edges of the nose. I switched to a fine tip brush for chips along panel lines and body edges. For this type of detail work, I like to try and keep the brush less loaded with paint, kind of a middle point between a wet brush and a dry brush. so a damp brush, I guess. For an added touch, I placed these chips where I thought the cockpit boarding ladder would create some wear. For deep chipping, I used the same Vallejo metallic gunmetal I did for the exhaust nozzles. Sparingly applied the color in large chipped areas to give the wear some extra dimension. The camera doesn't pick up the metal shine very well, but this color is amazing for this effect. Highly recommend. I opted to add a thin brown wash as a filter to add some dirtiness. Off camera, I applied a matte clear coat so that the enamel wash would leave behind a small amount of color despite being wiped away. This way, the filter color blends in and doesn't look like a layer of paint on top of another layer of paint. Next, I took some dark enamel wash colors and flicked spots and spray patterns using a flat brush and the shaft of cotton bud. I experimented with different splatter methods just to see what it looks like. I imagine these might be hydraulic fluids being sprayed by exploding TIE fighters or something, but really could be anything. I just wanted to try adding another effect that had some visual difference to it. For added practice, I went absolutely ham on the bottom of the ship, because if any place gets mud and dirt kicked up, it's here during landings, and this was a lot of fun to do. Plus, no one's ever really going to see it. For streaking, I started with Starship streaking grime on the wings and body panels. I applied the paint in a somewhat streak shape and let it dry for about 30 minutes. I then come back at it with a flat brush dampened with thinner, but only to the point where I couldn't see any wet streaks when I brush on my hand. The trick here is to be patient and lightly pull the paint down. Don't rush it. Letting the streak dry a bit between groups of strokes helps to avoid too much thinner building up. How do I know this? Let's just say this video doesn't need to be 6 hours of me doing the same streaks over and over again. I went with some interior streaking grime for fluid leaks from panels and seams. This particular product seems to have a thicker consistency than the other, and I find it streaks much better. Sometimes it only requires a handful of brush strokes to get the desired look. This one only took 4 passes, and is my favorite one. I also applied a substantial amount to areas where I thought dirt would accumulate. Dabbing with a brush feathers the paint so it doesn't appear to have a hard starting edge and blends in nicely. Really just didn't want to leave any area looking too clean or untouched. I had some AK rust deposit product that I've been wanting to use, so I tried it out on the mechanical greeblies. Don't really know what I'm doing with it, just threw it on some spots and see how it comes out. I may have rushed it though because I wanted to get to this next step. I'd been waiting months to use these Tamiya weathering pastels, as I had an idea to use them for charring on the engine intakes as if the intakes had flamed out at one point. And they nailed it. I don't think I could have pulled this off with an airbrush, so I'm super happy that these came through for me. I continued on to apply the pastel on other intakes and decided to just keep going with it for other carbon scoring marks. I used it for fire damage and blaster hits, trying different movements with the applicator to see what patterns and textures it creates. The reference photos on the physical model had charring on the nose cone, so I applied the pastel in a streaking motion from front to back. The pastel sticks to itself and doesn't remove previous layers, so to get thicker coverage, I just went back over and over until I got the opacity I wanted. I took some of the rust color pastel and used it to shade these rear panels. If I ever paint something bright orange again, I might use this to do some post shading for it. The last effect I used the pastels for was the scorch marks coming out these round hatches. The hatch is clean, but the rim around it is burnt, so I first used some Vallejo liquid mask to fill in the round outline, and then made my scorch streaks. Once happy with the look, peeled the mask off, and give myself a pat on the back. I airbrushed on the torpedo exhaust singeing for a more dispersed look, and provided some visual difference compared to the scorch marks above it. And that was it for paint. To finalize the display stand, I scanned the stand arm and drew the interior shape in Photoshop. I printed it out and used the shape as a mask to cut a piece of styrene that's used as a wire cover. I drilled out the holes for my positive and negative wires, then notched out the hole in the base where the USB power connector will go. I secured it in place with some UV resin, then soldered my wires to the power board. And all that's left is to see what it looks like. This was not the most fun to build. I'm happy with the way it turned out, but this was the hardest project I've faced so far, and it's entirely my fault. This kit isn't designed to be lit, and my choice to do so caused a lot of frustration. With that though, what I've learned has been invaluable and only makes me better. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and check out my channel for other videos. See you next time.